Welcome to this series of introductory lessons related to the time value of money. My name is Brent Pritchard. I teach college finance courses, and I'm here to help you grasp this all-important concept. This introductory series is designed to help you learn how to apply the mathematics of finance in less than a month, provided you commit to one or more lessons a day. It's that easy. Acquiring the hard skill that is the mathematics of finance does not need to be hard. I hope you enjoy this fun new take on this age-old concept. And after you've done that, please consider telling your friends about this channel, TVM Rules, and the book, Would Your Boomerang Return, also known as the Boomerang Book, that made it possible. I like to start every class with a quote, so here we go with the quote of the lesson. The most popular systems are those that apply a disciplined, systematic technique. In this lesson, we're focused on the TVM Wallet. But we can't really talk about the TVM Wallet without mentioning the TVM Rules, which are based on the mnemonic indifferent and provide the blueprint and audible aid for the three-step systematic approach. One word with its two main components will not only help you remember the three TVM rules, but also the three simple steps needed to apply the mathematics of finance using the visual aid and template or insurance policy that is the TVM Wallet. Each window of the TVM Wallet relates to one of the TVM rules. So let me ink up the pen and show you what I mean. We've got our blue ink. In the first window of the TVM Wallet, we have the words, plural, in and different. In the second window of the TVM Wallet, we have the word in. And in the third window of the TVM Wallet, we have the word different. So let's start with the first window of the TVM Wallet with the words in and different. This relates to TVM rule number 1. It's a no-no to add or subtract or compare money in different points in time. Let's move on to the second window of the TVM Wallet. TVM rule number 2. We must correspond the time span in between periods or payments on the timeline and the time span of the true investment yield. The true investment yield is denoted by the variable I, lowercase I. And now let's move on to the third window of the TVM Wallet and the word different. Again, this relates to TVM rule number 3. We must consider the different payment types and signs. So why is the three-step systematic approach the holy grail of the time value of money? Well, because it provides a simple and definitive systematic approach. Content related to the time value of money in most publications is cookie cutter. We have the gatekeeper publishing houses not to thank for that blueprint. I write about this in the book. It was in industry literature, papers, not books, where I found PhDs or PhD candidates attempting to develop systems to provide aspiring and current finance professionals with a method for applying the mathematics of finance. But their attempts at developing a go-to systematic approach left much to be desired. It was as if they were laying the steps by a big hole in the dirt where the foundation should be, instead of building from the ground up. The gaping hole I found in these attempts was that each one lacked definitive steps. Much of what I found consisted of flowcharts with questions that instead of leading to an answer seemed to raise more questions, which is a problem. So here's the real world situation that we'll be analyzing in this lesson. One thing to point out, because we're dealing with a lump sum payment, not an annuity, you get to determine how you're going to tell time. And we're going to approach this question, because we don't want it to be a problem, in 3 different ways. So the first thing that we're going to do is to draw the TVM Wallet. The TVM Wallet is meant to be drawn. You saw the TVM Wallet illustration that Scott Alberts was kind enough to draw for us and to create. but the TVM wallet is meant to be drawn. And I don't know, maybe it's even easier to draw than a stick person. It's important to draw a distinction between the first and second pass through the TVM wallet. The first pass through the TVM wallet consists of the warm-up and quick cool-down that involves initially visiting each window of the TVM wallet in a counterclockwise manner. The left side and right side of the TVM wallet is where the warm-up and quick cool-down will happen respectively. In the second pass, you're going to work out the math using the 3 simple steps, the 3-step systematic approach. In other words, you'll be in a position to work out or run the numbers using the 3-step systematic approach once all the known values for the 5 primary TVM variables are listed in the TVM wallet. Before you can progress through the steps in the prescribed 1-2-3 manner, you'll have to have completed the 3-1-2 warm-up routine, the primary purpose of which is to determine the true investment yield, lowercase I. Without the correct true investment yield, don't waste your time. The 3-1-2 warm-up routine to the 3-step systematic approach helps to mitigate the risk of garbage in, garbage out. You don't want garbage in for the in of indifferent or the true investment yield. So let's start in the first window of the TVM wallet. Remember, we do the warm-up on the left side and the quick cool down on the right side, and we're working through the TVM wallet in a counterclockwise manner. So in the first window, we're going to draw a timeline. And this is an abridged timeline, and this is the abridged symbol. Those 2 lines. And we're lucky because we've got $10,000 burning a hole in our pocket. We just got a check, and we want to invest those monies. So let's talk through what we're doing here. We're visualizing. It's good to visualize. But we start by counting money, and that relates to TVM rule number 3. Then we're going to move on to telling time. That relates to TVM rule number 1. And then we're going to read and write I, the true investment yield, which relates to TVM rule number 2, the 3-1-2 warm-up routine. So we've counted the money here. And what I mean by counting the money is to visualize how monies will flow. Why do we have a negative sign in front of the $10,000? Because those are monies that you plan to invest, so they will be leaving your hand. And it's a lump sum amount. We don't have an annuity here. We're ultimately trying to determine the future value 10 years from now. So we've counted the money. We've quote unquote counted the money. Now let's move on to how we're telling time. Let's fill in the blank. What's the time span in between period markers on this timeline? Well, on this timeline, this is an annual time span. So there we go. We've told time. We've counted the money. We've told the time. Now we need to read and write I. Because we have an annual time span in between time period markers, only a true annual investment yield is going to work. So we've started to read and write I. Now I'm going to write the building block true investment yield equation up here in the right corner of this slide. We need to determine I, the true investment yield. In particular, for this case, the true annual investment yield. So let's fill in this equation. And this is the decimal form of the simple monthly investment yield. Remember, simple is another word for nominal. It also tells us that the effects of compounding have not been considered. So that's 0.5%, and I just wrote the decimal form because we need to be working with the decimal form in this equation. Compounding is assumed to happen monthly, and we want to know what's the true annual, so the true fill in the blank, what's the true annual investment yield? 0.005, that's the decimal form of 0.5%. S in this equation is what I call the caterpillar rate. That's the place to start. When we divide the caterpillar rate by 1, what do we get? We don't even need to put a number to this. We just need to put words to this at this point. We started with a simple monthly investment yield. When we divide by 1, what are we left with? It's still a simple monthly investment yield. So within parentheses, we still have a simple monthly investment yield after we divide by 1, and that's what I call the chrysalis rate. Now we need to make the ultimate jump to the true annual investment yield, and we have to ask ourselves the right question. And the right question in this case is, how many months are in a year? And we know that is 12, and so lowercase n takes the value of 12. And when we work out the math, we get 0.061678. So that is 6.1678%, and that is the true annual investment yield. So let's retrace our steps here. We counted the money. And what that means is we said, okay, we have a lump sum payment here. We have $10,000 that will be invested. We told time. We looked at our timeline. Visualization helps, doesn't it? And we said, what's the time span in between period markers? We filled in the blank with an uppercase A. It's an annual time span. We told time. And then we moved on to reading and writing I. We were able to put a T in front of the A and a Y after the A and say that only a true annual investment yield is going to work here. That's the only I that we can use for compounding in this case, or in another case, discounting. And then we wrote out the building block true investment yield equation, and we put some values to the variables, and we determined the true annual investment yield of 6.1678%. So we're still warming up. We're going to put an A here for the subscript for uppercase N to remind us how we're telling time. We're going to fill in this blank here. In my trusty HP12C, I need to input the percentage form for the true investment yield. Your financial calculator may be different. And remember, the TVM Wallet is meant to be used in conjunction with your financial calculator. So hopefully wherever you are, if you're at home or somewhere else, you're following along and plugging in numbers. And we know that we have 10 periods, 10 annual periods over this investment period or investment horizon. Okay, now let's move over to the right side of the TVM Wallet with our quick cool down. So here's where we write in the PV, PMT, and FV. These all are forms of payments. A PMT payment deals with an annuity or a perpetuity, which is an annuity on steroids, and we don't have that here. We have a lump sum payment. And so we put in negative $10,000 for PV, 0 for PMT payment, and we solve for the future value. And when we solve for the future value, we get $18,193.97. So there's our answer. I promised you that we're going to approach this from a couple different angles. 3 to be exact. And so let's do it again. Why not? So I'm going to draw this timeline. This looks a lot like the timeline that we just had. And we've got our $10,000. So we're quote unquote counting money here, aren't we? In that we're identifying what we're dealing with. In other words, are we dealing with a lump sum payment, or are we dealing with an annuity or a perpetuity? Here we're dealing with a lump sum payment. So that's what I mean by counting money. Now we tell time. So how are we telling time on this timeline? Well, let's change it up a little bit. Remember, we have the flexibility to determine how we're telling time. Why? Because we're not dealing with an annuity or perpetuity. So let's say that we were dealing with quarters. So now we have 40. Let me clean that up. Now we have 40 time periods on this timeline. So this is a quarter. So we've counted the money, we've told the time, now we need to read and write I. So we know that only a true quarterly investment yield is going to work. That's the first part of reading and writing I. And we're going to write out the building block true investment yield equation again, because that's good form. And we're going to write in 0.005 for S, 1 for C, because here we're assuming that compounding happens monthly. As I've mentioned before in a prior lesson, the plug number for C can be 1 at times, and so here that's just the assumption. You may recall that no information was provided in the question about the compounding period. So here we're assuming the compounding period is monthly. And we need to determine the value for lowercase n to solve for what will be the true fill in the blank quarterly investment yield. We have to ask ourselves the right question, and the right question here is, how many months are in a quarter? And that answer is 3. And when we work this out, we get 0.015075 or 1.5075%. Now, just believe me or trust me on this. If this hasn't gotten you yet, it will. There are 4 quarters in a year and 3 months in a quarter. It's so easy for people to want to put 4 here, and that's just not the value that lowercase n takes here. This has gotten me a couple times, and again, if it hasn't gotten you yet, it probably will. So just watch out for that. And again, we're working to solve for the future value. So we're going to circle FV. We're still on our warm-up, and we're telling time with a quarterly time span. So we're going to put a Q in the subscript for N to remind us how we're telling time. And we've got our true quarterly investment yield. Again, I have to input this as a percentage. And there are 40 periods on this timeline or over this investment horizon. Now let's move over to the right side of the TVM wallet where we do our quick cool down before going through the 3-step systematic approach. We write in PV, PMT, and FV. We're not dealing with an annuity here, so PMT payment takes a 0 value. Negative $10,000 for PV. Again, why negative? Because the sign tells us the direction of the money. It's leaving our hands. It would be deposited or it would be invested, and the expectation here is that you would earn 1.5075% on your money. That's the true investment yield. In this case, the true quarterly investment yield over an investment horizon that includes 40 quarters. And when we solve for future value, we get $18,193.97. Recognize that number? It's the same number. No surprise. Remember, I told you that you have the flexibility to determine how to tell time for this situation because you're not dealing with an annuity or a perpetuity. So let's do this one more time. We're going to start in the first window of the TVM wallet, and we're going to draw our timeline. When in doubt, draw a timeline. Here's a symbol for the abridged timeline, and we've got $10,000 burning a hole in our pocket. We just got the check. Negative $10,000, why? Because we plan to invest it now. But let's change things up a little bit. Let's put a 2 between the 1 and the 0. Now, we've counted our money. Now we need to tell time. How are we telling time? Remember, this is a 10-year investment horizon. So we're telling time with a monthly time span in between period markers. Counted the money. In other words, we've said this is a lump sum. It's not an annuity. We've told time. There's a monthly time span now in between period markers on this timeline. Now we need to read and write I. The first step is to put a T and a Y up here to say only a true monthly investment yield is going to work here. It's the only rate that will fly. That's why we call I the butterfly rate. Remember, we start with a caterpillar rate, we move to a chrysalis, we ultimately get to I, the butterfly rate, the only rate that will fly. What does that mean in terms of the time value of money? The only rate that you can use for compounding or discounting. It's that simple. So now let's get about writing the building block true investment yield equation like we do. And this one's really easy because we started with a caterpillar rate of 0.5%. So 0.005, that's the decimal form of that. A caterpillar rate of 0.5%. When we divide by 1, why do we divide by 1? Because we're assuming monthly compounding here. We're left with the chrysalis rate. Kind of looks like a chrysalis, doesn't it? Inside parentheses. What is that? Let's put words to it. It's still a simple monthly investment yield. And so how do we move to a true monthly investment yield? Lowercase n takes the value of 1 here. And so it's the same, but it's not because S is not I. And that's why I always recommend people working it out all the way to I, because I is the only rate that will fly or yield that can be used for compounding or discounting. And if you look at the 8 building block time value of money equations that relate to present or future value, whether for a lump sum, annuity, or perpetuity, obviously this equation right here, the building block true investment yield equation, rounds that out. It is the 9th. But if you look at the other building block time value of money equations, the ones that relate to present or future value, you won't find S in any one of those equations, only I. Remember, I is the only rate or yield that will fly. That's why we call it the butterfly rate. And so we have pretty much done the 3-1-2 warm-up routine because we've determined I. I'm going to put an M here in the subscript for uppercase N to remind us how we're telling time. And we've got 120 periods over this investment horizon. We know our I, our butterfly rate, our true investment yield, which in this case is a true monthly investment yield, and it's 0.5%. Now let's move over to the right side of the TVM wallet. This is the quick cool down. We don't have an annuity here. We're solving for, I'm going to go back to the first window and circle FE because that's what we're solving for. We've got $10,000 and we're going to invest it. That's why 10,000 is negative. And when we solve for the future value, I'm sure you saw this coming. It's the same value. Why? Because we're indifferent between these different rates given these different time spans in between period markers on the timeline. So that's a wrap. If you like what you learned in this lesson, please consider telling your friends about this channel, TVM Rules, and the book that made it possible. My experience in the classroom has provided firsthand evidence that even the most dedicated students can stumble or struggle when applying the mathematics of finance. Yet, very little has been done as it relates to alternative ways of teaching the time value of money. It's not uncommon for finance textbooks to devote only one chapter to the single most important topic related to finance and money. And if that's not enough, these traditional finance textbooks, they're putting students to sleep as unintended bedtime stories. And I don't know how finance instructors can sleep at night with the knowledge that business school graduates, yes, including those who have studied finance, likely don't know the time value of money like the backs of their hands into which diplomas are being placed. If you haven't purchased your copy yet, all the important information on this all-important topic is gift wrapped within the cover of Would Your Boomerang Return? Until next time, enjoy the gift that is the present.